People say that truth has three versions: mine, yours, and the actual truth. In the case of Meredith Kercher, there were also three faces attached to the supposed truth of her murder. The question we need to attempt to answer today, based off of the physical evidence, is which one sounds the most plausible. Friends and associates, I hope you're refreshed. I hope you're gonna be getting regular caffeine kicks during this one to keep your mind abuzz. So that's not a word, your immigrant has just invented a word. Is abuzz a word? Google it later. Listen, I'm going to offload insane amount of information at you during this video. If you haven't watched part 1, please do, in order to understand who Meredith was as a person, in order to catch up on her trip to Perugia and the last days of her life. But if you have already done that, if you are ready to dive in, today we are gonna be picking up from where we left it off in part 1. I will just quickly recap part 1 for you. Then we are gonna be talking about the discovery of the crime scene, the background of the three people that will eventually be charged with Meredith's murder, and then the evidence collection, breaking down that crime scene room by room, finishing off this video with the signed statements by the three people that will eventually lead to those charges. And then in part 3 we are picking up with the remainder of this case. So there's a lot to go through. I need your Sherlock caps on, so I hope you have snacks, you have coffee ready, you take regular breaks, you hydrate and urinate. Please make sure bodily fluids are flying through you. This is why people switch off. This is why people skip the timestamps. Let us dive in and let me quickly summarize part 1 for you. In part 1 we spoke about Meredith Kercher, about her upbringing here in the UK, about her love for Italy and Italian language that would eventually lead her to choose a degree that would allow her to have a year abroad. We spoke about how close she was with her family, but somehow on the night of her murder, upon her family not answering one single phone call, she doesn't call them back. Rather, her phone would show an hour of inactivity, followed by a couple of random actions, only for that same phone, alongside the other one that she borrowed from her flatmate, to be found in someone's garden later on. And this, the phones being dropped off at someone's garden, would lead the postal police to come to the scene. We left that last video off with the postal police, a sort of more of a cyber unit rather than homicide detectives, arriving onto the scene and finding two people, not Meredith, outside of the house. One of them would be her flatmate, Amanda Knox, and the other person would be Amanda's boyfriend of around 7 days, called Raffaele. Now, what the police will tell the family, and what would later spread throughout the tabloids, was that Amanda and Raffaele had a mop and a bucket on them, and that it seemed like they have just caught them upon cleaning up. However, later, when people would actually dig into the initial reports that were passed on to the media and the police has been contacted, this particular incident was nowhere on the record. Not even the prosecutor would ever be able to confirm it. And on top of that, the scientific police would have never tested for such items, which would have surely been done, considering that that would incriminate those two individuals, that would mean that they have been found quite literally cleaning up the crime scene. So if they were to have even encountered this kind of scene, well then that would have been it. The homicide detectives would have been called then and there, because they would have quite literally seen a bloody mop and a bucket. But that kind of gives you a taste of how this whole investigation, from evidence collection, communication with the media, what will be published versus the versions of events by the individuals involved, is going to be like throughout the rest of this case. And that is going to also be how I will structure this video. This is so that you have an unbiased account of events, and then later in part 3, when we actually summarize the pre-trial and the trial, you already know the arguments that are going to be thrown around, and you already know what we are looking at. And it is exactly for you to kind of hear what is being said and then see the pictures and make your own decision. Because as I mentioned in the beginning, there are different versions of the truth. And the ones that can't be corroborated by actual physical evidence are either black or white, depending on who you ask, whether it is the police or whether it is Amanda and Raffaele and Rudy who will serve the sentence for this murder. And at least in my opinion, usually when you see those two versions that drastically, when they're based on hearsay, the truth lies somewhere in between. So that's why in this video we will mostly be focusing on the physical evidence from this point on, and again structure it in that way to see what the police has said, and then later what would lead to the exoneration and release of these individuals. So to pick up in the timeline, we are still in front of the cottage and the postal police is about to enter. Even before they were to enter the cottage, the first point of contention here is when did Amanda and Raffaele decide to call the police? Because this was the postal police that was actually sent through for a completely different reason. And the records here will show that at 11:50 a.m. Lana discovers two cell phones in her garden. She calls the postal police, and this postal police traces one of those phones back to Meredith's flatmate Filomena, who basically lent this phone to Meredith to use in Italy so that she can use her second phone to communicate with her family in the UK. Following that discovery, that is why the postal police was at the cottage in the first place, but Filomena wasn't there because she was sleeping at her boyfriend's the night before. They were out of town, and then they were to return to Perugia on the 2nd, because if you remember, it was a bank holiday on the 1st, and the 2nd is known as the All Souls Day, so there is a whole fair in town. While at the fair, Filomena got a call from Amanda, who told her she slept at Raffaele's and that when she got back to the cottage that morning, she found the front door open and some blood in the bathroom. So she was spooked, but she still went into that bathroom in order to have a shower. And she was scared and was going to phone Raffaele. So this seemed very strange to Filomena, and she asked her to check to see if the rest of the house is in order. So in terms of the phone activity, we have Amanda trying Meredith first before she even called Filomena. There is only about a minute in between the calls, the attempted call to Meredith and then the one to Filomena, and people would later say that the calls to Meredith were again just kind of staged, just to see that, she tried, and they actually lasted only a couple of seconds. And then as soon as Amanda would think, okay, well now that's logged on my phone, then she would hang up and just follow through and called Filomena to actually tell her something was off. After that call to Filomena at 12:11, Amanda will try calling Meredith on her Italian phone. Then she would try the UK number again, and in the following 20 minutes, Filomena will call Amanda 3 times. And during the last call, Filomena would say that Amanda told her that she had actually gotten into her room at this point, Filomena's room, and that the window in it was broken and that the room was a mess. So at that point, Filomena just told her, okay, something's definitely off, please just call the police. And Amanda told her that she already had. On Amanda's records, this phone call is logged to have happened at 12:34. And if we are to trust those records, Amanda didn't call the police before that time. She would ring them later, but then it would be decided that Raffaele, who is more fluent, should actually ring 112. Raffaele would make those calls to the police at 12:51 and 12:54, and there would be 2 calls because the first one cut off. So during the first call, he said that there was a mess inside of the house and that the door was closed. And when the dispatcher asks, did the intruder enter because the window was broken, did they cut themselves breaking the window, the call cuts off and Raffaele calls back. And during that second call, he kind of just says like, oh, sorry, you know, the phone line cut off a few seconds ago, it was me. And he confirms that according to him, they didn't take anything, but that the problem is the closed door, that they don't know where one of the flatmates is. And the dispatcher just confirms that they're sending the police car. And then we have the CCTV footage from the car park nearby that shows that police car at 12:35 sort of reaching the gate and then still at the entrance closest to the cottage at 12:45. The debate here is whether the clock on the CCTV was slow, and if so, then the actual time the postal police would arrive at the gate would be 12:58. That would fit Amanda and Raffaele's account of events. A quick recap on that, because just like with Lost Girls of Panama, we have like an earlier timeline and a later timeline. And the earlier timeline would fit the prosecution's account of events, the police, because it would prove that Amanda and Raffaele, whether they were staging the crime scene, whatever they were doing there, they were taking their precious time to actually call the police. Not just that, but making sure that they have lied to Filomena, saying that they have called the police. And most importantly, that they have just done it so that it is on the record once the police was already there, that they have actually alerted somebody. And then we have the later timeline, which fits into Amanda's and Raffaele's account of events, and that is, according to them, and me honestly just following the basic common sense, supported by the lack of reports by the postal police that they have been doing anything suspicious, like calling the police when the police was already there. Because here, Raffaele was Italian. Even if Amanda wasn't super fluent in it, which we will learn that she wasn't at this point, he would have understood the situation, that this is the postal police, that they have been called to come to the location. So he would have probably said it to Amanda like, hey, there's no reason why we should call the police now. Yes, it could be something shady going on, it could be that they have wanted to do it, but where this proceeds from now is, of course, the police is there, so they want to examine the house, and they all go in, and Amanda and Raffaele are sort of showing them around, like what made them ring the police in the first place. So I just can't imagine the scenario where the police arrives to the scene, leaves these two individuals that could be suspicious, according to the first accounts, are holding a mop and a bucket, just leave them out of the cottage to do their thing, to ring these numbers, to ring the actual police to be dispatched while they're there, and just do their thing, like just go into the cottage that isn't theirs to begin with, that they have been called to because of the phones. I just don't see it happen. I just genuinely here do not see the prosecution's side of events. In fact, actually, I've just had a double take, because when we actually are talking about the phone records, we have them in front of us. So there is inactivity on both of those phones right after they have said, Amanda and Raffaele, that the police has arrived. So the last call Amanda makes is to her mom in Seattle in the US, but you know, her mom doesn't pick up because it's the middle of the night there, and that is at 1:58 p.m. The next call would be almost an hour later, and the similar thing happens with Raffaele. So the last call is 1:50 p.m. to his dad, and then he would call his dad about 40 minutes after that, which would support the police arriving on the scene and then the two of them showing them around. So once they actually get into the cottage, the police does see a couple of red flags. Because at this point, Filomena's door to the room is open. So they enter and they see what they will immediately think is a staged robbery. They see that the window has been broken, they see the glass on the floor, and the clothes scattered across of it. But what immediately makes them suspicious is that that glass is on top of the clothes, implying that the clothes have first been scattered over the floor and then somebody broke the window in order to stage the robbery. Another thing that made them believe that this was indeed a staged robbery was just by even accessing the cottage. First of all, you can see it from the street. You would be able to see that window. So for somebody to break into it, that would be very risky. But not just risky, but the distance between the ground and Filomena's window was, even just at the first glance, 3 to 4 meters. So somebody would have to have like almost superhuman powers to actually choose this as their point of entry. Inside of Filomena's room, they have also seen some jewelry and a laptop. I think there was a camera there as well. So if this was the point of entry and they have already done all of this effort to be in, why not actually steal the valuables that are inside of that room? And as they're walking around, Filomena by this point has arrived home. So this is at some point between 1 and 1:15 p.m. It is Filomena, it is her boyfriend, and the police has so far been told that Meredith does actually lock her room. So, this isn't super out of the ordinary, but it's just a couple of red flags. And they have been told this by Amanda. Now Filomena enters the scene and she is clearly alarmed, seeing her room, seeing that it seems like there has been a break-in. But something that nobody sees is any blood, any visible footprints, fingerprints, anything really bloodied up. And that is until they reach Meredith's door. There on the outside, not even on the doorknob, but rather where that door latch would be if somebody was to have locked the door, which we know happened here, there is just the smallest smudge of blood. And at this point, Filomena has told the police a different story, and that is that Meredith has never, for the 2 months that she has been living there, been known to lock her door. So the police doesn't sense any immediate danger. They don't want to disturb Meredith, who might be just inside sleeping for all they know, but Filomena tells them that they do have her permission. So she actually asks her boyfriend to knock that door down. And as soon as she does, herself and the police enter the room. And they find a gruesome scene. They find the blood staining the floor and the walls, and they see a foot protruding from a doorway that is seemingly over somebody on the floor. Upon the realization that they have just entered the crime scene, the postal police ordered everybody to leave the room immediately. They have sealed it and called for the homicide detectives to come. Once this happens, according to the phone records, we have Amanda calling her aunt, who will tell her to, ring her mom, and then that she will eventually probably need to get a lawyer, considering that her flatmate had just gotten murdered. And we have Raffaele making a phone call to his dad. However, now that the two of them are just outside comforting one another, once the police arrived to the scene, the media outlets already started picking up that something is happening, and they have sent their reporters. And here is where we have the infamous pictures of this case, where Raffaele and Amanda are just kissing outside, comforting one another. I don't plan to do what everybody has done on this case and spend insane amount of time talking about how odd or not odd this behavior is. You can make your own decisions on that. There is one remark on it that I wanted to make, and that is that while those pictures were taken, there was a particular picture that emerged where there seems to be a wound on Amanda's neck. And she would later say this was a hickey. It kind of doesn't look like a hickey, but also it doesn't look like a defensive wound. It looks like, I don't know, something to do with either skin condition, psoriasis, doesn't look like psoriasis, but again, it doesn't look like any of those things. And this would be the only wound of sorts that the police will ever find on Amanda. Just something to bear in mind, because we should yet again be focusing on the actual evidence rather than, how somebody is acting in situations of stress. The police here surrounds the crime scene, and again, according to the phone records by both Amanda and Raffaele, they have eventually been transported to the police station. Amanda by around 3:30 p.m. and Raffaele by 5. During the interrogations with the police over the next 5 days, Amanda will mention a basketball player that visited the house, mostly the basement floor, the one below them, but she never incriminated him. Rather, it will be the DNA evidence in and on Meredith's body, on Meredith's purse, inside of one of the toilets in the house, the handprint in Meredith's blood that was found on a pillowcase in her own room that will lead the police to their third suspect. This man will end up serving the longest sentence for her murder out of all three of them, while Amanda and Raffaele will eventually be exonerated. So in order to understand whether any or all of these three parties had any reason to be on this crime scene, if they would have had any motives or anything in their history inclining that they would be behind this crime, we need to go into their background and speak about all three of them. And to do that, let us begin with a guy that we haven't spoken about yet, a man named Rudy Gude. Rudy was born on December the 26th, 1986 in Ivory Coast. His dad back home was training to become a teacher, but shortly after Rudy was born, he decided to move to Italy, hoping that he can find a better job there. So he left Rudy behind with his own mom. Now, in Italy, he could only find employment as bricklayer, according to the records. However, he decided to stick with it. He worked for 5 years in order to get a permit. And then in 2002, once he got that residence permit, he decides to bring his then 5-year-old son over as well. There's a lot of instability from the sounds of it in Rudy's life, a lot of details that we are just missing, but we know that his dad would often work remotely, so that means that local families surrounding them in Italy would step in to look after him. Throughout his childhood, it seemed like this maths teacher was actually one of his main carers. She said she saw no red flags, that he was a quiet and well-behaved child. Then, during the teenage years, Rudy had to return to the Ivory Coast in order to renew his passport in 2004, but there he becomes caught in the civil war and was away for 6 months. And once he returns back, he actually gets taken in to be temporarily fostered by this family until they're to decide if, it works out for them and if they want basically to keep him on. Now, the foster father that would eventually end up adopting him was actually head of a quite famous company in Italy, the manufacturer of coffee vending machines called Liomatic. And, this could have turned out great for Rudy, who so far didn't have the most stable life. But he just didn't really fit into the family. All he wanted to do was just skip school, he just didn't really see the point. Go play basketball at a local court where he already had made friends, or just play video games. His foster dad would say that Rudy was an inveterate liar, but the foster mom would say that he would just lie in order to protect himself, that he was never doing it for any malicious intentions, or to hurt others or gain personal advantage. For whatever reason, whether Rudy wasn't fitting with the family or reasons unknown, at the age of 19, he would leave them, he would leave the foster family and move to Milan area to live with his aunt. Here, he found a job as a waiter. He sort of had high hopes of becoming a restaurateur one day. But then in 2007, that restaurant has closed and Rudy was left jobless. So here he returns to Perugia and his foster family kind of accepts him back, but of course they want him to move the hell out at this point as well. So they find him a gardening job at a restaurant that they owned. But here Rudy would show to be unreliable and eventually they would fire him. As this is already a few months before the murder and he didn't have any, job stability, any regular income, he manages to rent a student flat in Via Canarino, so in Perugia, and here he would have said to have lived between July 2007 until the time of Meredith's murder, but nobody really knows how he actually paid that rent. According to the online sources, they say there was a book written on Rudy himself, so he could have been either living off of his savings or unemployment benefits, and those would have entitled him to about 40% of his previous pay. In terms of his social life during this period of time, well, rather picking up in early October, he would still be chilling at the basketball court with his friends, but also, in town when clubbing or just in the city center, he would eventually meet the people that lived in the bottom flat of the cottage where Meredith would be murdered. One day in early October, as Amanda and Meredith were with the guys from downstairs in the city center, they just happened to come upon Rudy. So they invited him to the basement flat, and Amanda and Meredith were there. Amanda stayed longer and they kind of all just smoked some weed. Rudy would say Amanda just had, the joint in her mouth the whole evening. She was just smoking and smoking. But here is when the guys would say that Rudy kind of expressed interest in Amanda. He simply asked was she seeing anybody, but he never proceeded to ask her out or to find out more about her. It was just plain interest. And then on Sunday, the 21st of October, Rudy would return to the flat. He would only spend time with the guys from downstairs. They would watch Formula One. And there are two versions of this story and how it ends. One is that evening he just kind of, without the guys even knowing, spent the night on their toilet, as in he went and then just they never realized that he actually hasn't left the house. Or that there was a third time that he was in the flat after a club where he just stayed over and again was so drunk that he passed out on the toilet. According to Rudy's diary that would later be made public, he met Amanda once at a club where she would be working at. He remembers being given a flyer to this club, La Chic, where Amanda was working, and then she was hired there, as we are about to learn soon, to basically delight the customers, to make sure that they keep the drinks coming, to make sure that they stay around, and so she was doing exactly that. She was nice, came with a smile on her face, started chatting with Rudy. And he remembers it just being a regular conversation with just how are you? Where are you from? He remembers that she was from Seattle, but he didn't strike up any sort of relationship with her. What we have spoken about in the past few minutes would have been hearsay, right? It is people from downstairs flat, people from upstairs flat, and what Rudy would eventually say. What we don't have is any physical evidence connecting Rudy to either Amanda or Raffaele, showing that they were friends, showing that they exchanged phone numbers, showing that they were in touch between early October and the 1st of November. And that I want you to bear in your mind, because it is confirmed by other people as well, that they're not friends, that they weren't hanging out on their own, that Rudy wouldn't be the person going upstairs for whatever reason, and we just don't have any texts, any calls with Rudy from him initiating conversations with the two of them, or the other way around. So just bear that in mind, because we are supposed to be buying into a story where these three people together committed this murder without having ever spoken or had an actual complete conversation with one another. There might have been a reason as to why Rudy didn't pursue anything with Amanda, or why he didn't hang out in the basement flat beyond those 2 times that would be confirmed by the guys downstairs, or even why he wouldn't have chosen to rob the flat that he was already familiar with. And that is that from the moment that he had actually met them, from mid-October all the way up until the 1st of November, Rudy was committing petty crimes. And the only reason, the only motive if you wish, why I believe he was doing this was in order to pay for that rent, was in order to sustain himself. During the evening of October the 13th, someone broke into the law offices in Perugia. The window was smashed with a large stone, and a computer, a cell phone, USB keys, and a printer were not found there once the police got there, so they assumed that the thief has taken those items. Those items would be bought by somebody in Milan, and that somebody would eventually identify Rudy as the person that sold those items to them. Then, on October the 27th, the principal of a nursery school in Milan found somebody, again, coming through their office. The police was called there, and the person was identified as Rudy. There were no signs of break-in here. There was some money missing, but it was just said to be some small change, and the police asked him to open up his backpack. Here, inside of Rudy's backpack, they would find a computer, a 40-centimeter kitchen knife, a bunch of keys, a small gold woman's watch, and a small hammer that is used to break windows. That computer that they have found was the one from the first robbery, so maybe he just couldn't sell it by that point. Rudy had an explanation here. He said that at the train station he asked where he can stay in Milan, as if like he didn't have anywhere to stay, and they directed him to this nursery school. And here he didn't force his entry, he wasn't resisting, he waited for the police, so basically they just released him. However, they would still charge him for the possession of stolen goods, because they found that computer in his bag. But those charges would only be brought up in February of 2008, by which point he will already have been charged for Meredith Kercher's murder. This would be the only charge against Rudy, and if we are thinking dates here, we are led to believe that between October the 27th and the 1st of November, Rudy returned to Perugia. There will be eyewitness accounts saying that they have seen him in the club. As I mentioned, DNA evidence will be found in Meredith's room, confirming that he was there. He won't deny that he was there later on in the story. But just recapping everything we have just spoken about, Rudy seemed to have had a pattern of going in for the steal, regardless of what he was to find, regardless of the amounts. The places seemed to be at random. He seemed not to really mind, meaning that he might have actually been desperate. But thinking about the personal aspect of his life, he has met people at the downstairs flat in that cottage early October, then had gone to commit a couple of break-ins, 2 that we have confirmed on the record. There are other ones where it's speculated they didn't actually catch him on the scene, so they couldn't have known that it was Rudy or not. And then 27th of October, he commits this last one in Milan, he returns, and somehow, within the span of 3 days, arranges for a plan with 2 people that we don't know that he was friends with. Possible? Yes, maybe it happened in the city center at a basketball court, maybe the 3 of them met up and were actually best friends and we just don't know of and have never exchanged phone numbers, because of course then the police would have the receipts. Again, plausible, but nobody really makes it flow. Nobody really explains how that would have happened. Now let us talk about Raffaele Sollecito. He was born on March 26, 1984 in the south of Italy, and his dad was actually quite well off because he was a highly respected urologist. He had only one sibling, Vanessa, and his parents would eventually split up in the 90s, and both Raffaele and his sister would stay with their mom, while the dad would move on and he would marry his second wife. He was a smart but shy kid. He went to Albert Einstein High School of Science, and then in 2002 he moved to Perugia in order to graduate and also to enroll into the Faculty of Informatics. The only thing we know from Raffaele's time in school would come from the prosecutor's report, and that is that apparently teachers at this college would find some hardcore film containing scenes of sex with animals. So even though, yes, he was quiet, he was introverted and shy, watched many films, they said that in response to this, the teacher started monitoring him in an effort to understand him. But this has never been elaborated on, and apparently it happened in 2004, so 3 years before the story we're talking about today. Now, that same year, so 2 years after his move to Perugia, his mom would suddenly die. And there's no foul play. The autopsy was never carried out, but again, college administrators that have been apparently interviewed here again were told that apparently his mom might have committed suicide. Raffaele, just like Rudy and actually just like Amanda, will not have a completely clean record, which is kind of important because, of course, in court they're gonna say, you know, they have never been in trouble with the police. It kind of can influence then the judges, but that won't really be true. Nothing super serious again, nothing indicating that they were to go ahead and commit a brutal, gruesome murder. But in 2003, Sollecito was found in possession of 2.67 grams of hash. So this charge of possession is the only one that he would end up having on the record. Between 2005 and 2006, as part of his computer science course, he also had a year abroad in Germany. And once he returned to Perugia, instead of staying in the college accommodation, he moved into the apartment in Corso Garibaldi, which will be where he was still living at that point. And this was paid by his dad. According to his dad, Raffaele had a habit from his teenage years of carrying a penknife in his pocket, just sort of to like record things on the bark of the trees and carve wooden objects. So he owned several knives. I would call them specific. I don't know knives, but they do look like, you know, the collection that a collector would have. Wow, that was so nicely put. Put them on the screen. Okay. On this topic, for me, unless you are a collector of butter knives, everything else is too specific. So just make your own decisions on the knives that he had in his possession. We have the pictures of these two knives because one will actually be found on him when he was with Amanda that day and when he was brought to the police. And the other one would be found in his house. Now we are speaking pocket knives here, and neither of those knives would be used in the murder of Meredith. When it comes to his personal life, the only other relationship that we know of, apart from Amanda's, was that he had one that lasted only a few days, briefly a few months before October of 2007. And then, in October, on October the 25th, 2007, to be precise, he would go to a classical music concert. During this concert, he would be eyeing out a girl that was just sitting a couple of seats away. And this girl was sitting next to her friend, but this friend decided to leave early, so Amanda Knox was just sitting by herself. So Raffaele decides to sit next to her, decides to approach her, they start chatting and immediately hit it off. They loved how geeky one another was. Amanda, who already spoke German, was reading Harry Potter, so they kind of bonded over his year abroad in Germany. They just immediately clicked. According to all of the reports about this relationship that again lasted for only about a week, it was fast moving. They were spending all of their time together. Whether it was at Raffaele's, whether it was at Amanda's, they would be smoking weed most of the time, watching movies, sleeping with one another, but it was immediate and it just seems like they were inseparable. To put things into the perspective again, they have met October the 25th, Meredith's murder happened on the night of the 1st, so this relationship barely lasted a week. Yes, they were attached according to everybody. According to Raffaele's dad, he would speak with him several times a day, and Raffaele would always be talking about Amanda. Some people would say it kind of looked possessive. You can also understand it if this is his first serious relationship, And as we go into the story of Amanda's life, you can understand why she might have been looking for something like this. We have on this channel spoken about, I think, only one duo, Charles Ng and Leonard Lake, two people that have not met one another before, that have barely known each other for some time, and then decided to commit crimes together. Could that have happened here? It's again up to you to decide. There is a decision that has been made here, and both of these people ended up being exonerating, so just bear that in mind as you are writing the comments as well. But within a week, just something to keep in mind as you're listening to the evidence that was found in the cottage and in his flat, and when it comes also to phone communications, does it fit the story that the prosecution will try to push forward? And now we are to talk about the last part of this equation, Amanda Marie Knox. Amanda was born in Seattle on July the 9th, 1987. Her dad, Kurt, was an accountant at the time, and he eventually progressed to become a vice president of Macy's. And her mom, Edda, who was German, initially started working at a school library, but again progressed and trained herself and became a math teacher. There is a pattern when it comes to instability of sorts in the childhood of all three of these individuals, because Amanda's parents also got divorced in 1989 when Amanda was only 2 years old. Her dad would remarry and leave her and her younger sister Diana in the care of their mom. Just a quick note here, I haven't read Amanda Knox's book, Waiting to be Heard. I think there's like another one, but I have listened to a podcast by Stephanie Sue who has taken this from a different angle and has told Amanda's story, so she has done sort of a deep dive and has read a book in order to research on her childhood. So just a note, it's somebody else's account of events. If there's any information that I miss out, then let me know in the comments. So when Amanda was 10 years old, her mom would remarry an IT professional called Chris Mellis, but they would still have a decent relationship with their dad. According to her book, Dad remarried and had 2 daughters. So it's kind of awkward when she would go to visit her dad because, well, Amanda and Diana would kind of be left to sleep on the couch. They wouldn't just be treated the same. So eventually that dynamic was off, and when Amanda was about 14 years old, she just stopped going to visit her dad. Amanda's dream from her early childhood was to become a writer. She was already fluent in both English and German based off of her communication with the grandparents that live close by, and because obviously they were born there, as was her mom. In high school, Amanda describes herself as a quirky kid who hung out with the sulky manga readers, the ostracized gay kids, and the theater geeks. Since she didn't really fit in, she acted like herself, which pretty much made sure that she never did. According to her, she would always be able to get along with almost anybody. During high school was the first time that people started making fun of her, or according to her, worse, ignoring her. So she decided to make friends with a more mainstream group of girls and guys, attracted to them by how cohesive those groups looked. So they would travel in packs in the halls, would eat lunch together, hung out after school, and seemed to know each other forever. But in pulling away from her original friend group, she said she hurt them. And while the new friends were fun-loving, she was motivated to be with them by insecurity. She said she is ashamed for not having the guts to be herself no matter what anyone thought. These 2 paragraphs are directly from the book and kind of contradict one another, because she says in one she was desperately acting like herself, and then at some point changed the friend group, and then stopped doing that, stopped being herself. The way that Stephanie, who read the whole book, kind of interpreted this is that Amanda just wanted to be accepted. So she would make herself the butt of the joke, because she has now changed the friends group, so like what can she do? She thinks she can fit better there. but then she would make herself butt of the joke in order to be accepted. There is something there, again, in all of these stories that we just probably don't know, especially with Amanda, because she's telling us the story of her life as she wants to see fit. But there is something to be said when it comes to the instability of all three of these families, and how desperately all of these three individuals did try to fit in to a certain extent, whether it is in their social life, whether it is just the ability to survive and pay the rent, or whether it is in order to find a group that they belong to, in order to feel that sense of homeliness, which seems to have happened in Amanda's life a lot. During school, still, she was good at soccer, and this would actually be where her nickname Foxy Noxy would come about. She would be speedy on the field, and that is how her teammates have named her. And even though she was good at soccer, she finally had that sense of belonging. Her true passion, as she always known, was writing. She really just wanted to experience life, wanted to travel in order to improve her own writing. So in 2005, she started studying at the University of Washington, and she was studying German, Italian, and creative writing. And as a part of that degree, she could also spend some time abroad. While still studying in Seattle in June of 2007, the police will issue her with a citation because she hosted a party and the attendees of this party had caused some excessive noise, so the neighbors have complained, and they have also thrown rocks at passing cars. So here she had just gotten $269 fine, and that would be the only charge that Amanda Knox would have prior to her conviction for murder. Once Amanda told her parents that she wants to go to Italy in order to improve her creative writing, in order to learn the language, immerse herself into the culture, she got kind of mixed reactions. Her mom was psyched, she was like, yep, go for it. Her dad was kind of skeptical about how much money that will cost. And Amanda said, there's no issues, I'm gonna take up 3 jobs during the summer. So during that summer, she trained soccer team, she worked as a barista, and also worked for the local catering company for their parties overnight. So she knew she can support herself and, pay that rent herself and use the money from the savings account. So she knew she will be able to support herself, and she also knew she didn't want to stay on campus. She really wanted to live with Italians in order to push herself to actually speak the language. With that decision made, she plans to take Diana to experience Italy together, so that 2 of them go to Milan, then Florence, then for her sister to sort of see Perugia, for Amanda to find the flat or the house, and then they were to go to their family in Germany until the school was about to start, by which point only Amanda was to return. And from this point on, from what I gathered from somebody else's account of the book, is that Amanda would see every single decision in hindsight and call it a mistake. Like her friend buying her a dildo as a goodbye gift. It's like, big mistake, I packed it up. I thought, maybe I'm gonna meet an Italian man, but why not pack it up? Mistake, because then that would lead to her being sexualized after. Packing up her diary where she wrote about her previous relationships with 4 boyfriends that she had had by that point. Huge mistake, because everything in there would be misinterpreted later. The decisions that she has made to their trip to Italy that she would write about again in her diary would be misconstrued. Before we go on to speak about Amanda's trip to Perugia, I just wanted to make a note, because I feel like once I offload all of the information onto you, you're gonna start making judgments, be inclined to put some comments underneath, and sure, you can do that, I guess. Bear in mind again that this person has been exonerated of the crime, but I just wanted to really drill into people something that just isn't done so online. The emphasis on this story has never been that Amanda Knox in 2007, at the time of this happening, was only 20 years old. The prosecution and the media will make her sound like she has been living for this her whole life. For 20 years she has just been living to be discovered as this perpetrator, discovered by any means necessary, and then drive this narrative like for the rest of her life. So before posting a comment like that, whatever your opinion is on Amanda, trust me, I don't particularly like her myself. I have watched quite a few interviews throughout the years of her, and we'll speak more about that in the last parter. But don't you see that that is a bit creepy? Like, a lot creepy if you really think about it. That this person at the age of 20 has been portrayed as the devil herself, as if her whole life she has just been waiting for this opportunity, where suddenly all of her life is gonna be exposed, where she can finally be sexualized by everybody. And the reporters and the journalists and just the prosecution just never really see that. It just seems like it's never really processed. And once you actually stop to research this story and take all of the hearsay out of the equation, it just doesn't seem as extreme. It just doesn't seem as somebody who has been waiting for 20 years to be portrayed as the devil of Perugia herself. Just bear that in mind as we go along, because if inclined to publish any comments about Amanda Knox's character, you are talking about somebody who was at the age of 20, and again, if you are talking about the promiscuous part of her character, what does it have to do with the actual crime? So her sister Diana and her set out to go to Milan first. And here in Milan, as they go out to eat, this guy starts flirting with her. And he gets so enamored with Amanda that day that he even decides to change hotels to stay at the one where Amanda was. So they share dinner and this guy convinces Amanda to walk around the city. So she's 20 at this point, she doesn't see any danger here and she just decides to take this on as an adventure. The two of them share a joint together, they have a one-night stand, and then Amanda goes back to her room. Here her sister was pissed off, reasonably so, she had no idea where Amanda was. And in hindsight, about a few of these decisions in Perugia, in particular after this trip to Milan as well, Amanda will say she had just been throwing herself into an adventure. In hindsight, all of these decisions were quite stupid and also life-endangering, but back then she just saw it as like taking an opportunity as it came. Once they arrive to Perugia, their aunt has actually booked transport for them. She booked the bus ticket, but as you know, if you have traveled anywhere, you think it's one way, but you actually can't locate it on a map, it's quite confusing. So the two of them got lost, and instead Amanda suggested, let us walk to Holiday Inn. Like, it should be only a few minutes away, but it wasn't. And eventually, as they started walking, the pathway cut off and they were only left to walk on the highway. And as they did, a car stopped. The man kind of understood they're looking for Holiday Inn, and he tells them to jump into the car. And again, Amanda says, in hindsight, this was stupid, but I did. This man actually ends up being helpful and drives them to Holiday Inn. And here now, Amanda only has one day to find the accommodation before she was to go to Germany. So the pressure is on and she has a budget, so she's just going through the ads and decides maybe this is a sign, what do I do? So she decides to walk by the uni to just see, you know, if there are any further ads, if anybody's giving flyers, literally to just stop somebody and be like, hey, are you looking for a flatmate? And she does that and sees a brunette girl and just approaches her and asks her, hey, do you by any chance have an apartment for lease? I know this is random. And the girl says yes. And this girl was Laura Mazzetti. She immediately walks her to the cottage and she shows her the house, and at that point 2 rooms were available. Laura explains to her that the top floor is their apartment, that underneath in the basement flat there's a couple of other students. She introduces her to Filomena, and shows her the terrace, shows her the whole house, tells her the rent is about 400 a month, and it is right next to the school, tries to sell this location, and tells Amanda to choose which room she wants to take. Amanda chooses a smaller, cozier room with a view of the hill, and they part ways, and eventually Amanda will get an email while in Germany that there was another woman who is coming from the UK, so that's great, you guys speak technically the same language, and her name is Meredith, and she will be moving in shortly. Once Amanda would move in, she would meet Meredith. Everybody in the flat loved Mez. They were 1 year apart in age at this point. They both had divorced parents, and Meredith was going to a different uni. So not the University of Foreigners, rather University of Perugia. And Filomena and Laura, as I mentioned, were professionals, so Meredith and Amanda were kind of left to hang out. Amanda's story will significantly differ compared to the Kercher story of just how good of a friendship Meredith and Amanda have established. Amanda will of course say they were close friends, that they have chatted with each other, that they would do just like usual activities, they would meet up with each other. And then Kercher family kind of had a different account from the few bits of information that they would hear from Meredith herself. The truth, just like with most things in this case, especially hearsay, lies somewhere in between. I have seen some text sort of coming up to the 1st of November between the two. It just does seem casual, chatting about, I don't know, Halloween costume, or are you in the center, are you coming home, like things like that. It doesn't seem like the friendship of a lifetime, but it also doesn't seem like the two of them were mortal enemies. Within her first month in Perugia, Amanda would meet a guy in a coffee shop nearby, so she kind of started going there for coffee more and more often, and eventually he invites her out on a date. They go to this pizza place and it kind of looked packed, so the guy suggests that they go to his, and of course Amanda is like, great, I know what this means. So they have a one-night stand and Amanda just returns to the flat. He kind of technically kicked her out. But according to her book, she just convinced herself, like, okay, I mean, I can do it, it's just meaningless sex, like, I'm here anyways for a year, like, I'm not really looking for anything substantial anyways, like, what, I don't need a boyfriend. So she kind of sees him again, and then again freaks out, and just, it seemed like it wasn't for her. She didn't actually want to have casual sex, at least according to Amanda herself. So she returns home, and here Meredith was at home at that time, and she kind of consoles her and tells her maybe it's just not for you, maybe you just don't want to have meaningless sex going forward. To me, and this is definitely a personal opinion here, I don't know how you see Amanda's kind of behavior in personal life. To me, like, we all know a person like this, or we have, through certain parts of life, been a person like this, myself included, so that's how I see it. But you know how in life, in order to see the change, you have to make the change? At least in my opinion, Amanda just never took the chance to communicate with the guy and discuss, whether or not sleeping with you on the first date is gonna go into a relationship, or if that's the only thing that you want. The Euro Chocolate Festival that we mentioned in part 1 made an impression on Amanda herself. The chocolate that they have gotten for free, she brought home, and they all made cookies. She talks about it in the book, how they did get along with the guys downstairs, how they would smoke joints often, and how people made fun of her for like attempting to roll a joint. So she posed with the first joint that she ever rolled, and then that picture again was taken out of proportion later once she was charged. Amanda was also looking for a part-time job here to further support her year abroad, so she got introduced to a bar owner. And the job seemed easy. She was just to go around uni, give the flyers out. The club was called Le Chic, and the only thing was make sure it's packed, and then once it's packed, make sure that they are buying drinks, that they are enjoying themselves and don't really want to leave. She was to be paid $7.25 per hour, and at first she started working every day from 9:30 p.m. or 10, and then realized that's kind of like too intense, so she dropped it to 2 days a week. This club Le Chic was owned by a Congolese man called Patrick Lumumba, and Amanda at first thought it's gonna be a lot more fun, but then she kind of realized there was a catch there. She wasn't actually getting paid to give out flyers at uni, so she was like, okay, that doesn't seem really fair. And then she actually realized that the job is quite hard when you're doing it between like 9 p.m. and 1 a.m., trying to make drunk people happy. She kind of found it a lot more demanding than she thought it would be. Coming closer in our timeline, on October the 25th, Amanda would go to the classical music concert at the University of Foreigners, and here she would meet Raffaele. Raffaele quite quickly shared certain private details of his life, about his dad's profession, that his dad was quite difficult to say no to, how his mom died after the divorce, you know, what he's studying, the computer science, and that his dad is kind of pushing him to return to Milan. So he decided just to attend this concert to sort of clear his mind, and then he was about to make a decision. Amanda said that they kicked it off because of Seattle, that actually that's the first bond that they have had, about how Seattle is a tech city and Raffaele is into computer science, he's a tech geek. But even about the first kiss and the first time with Raffaele, she just said it felt comforting, like it felt homely for the first time since she left home, so that this is sort of exactly what she has actually been looking for. Amanda says that here, going home with Raffaele felt quite natural, it felt different, and that he seemed love-struck as well. So they basically live at Raffaele's more or less. She would just return home to like take clothes or shower or just maybe sometimes eat, but usually they would meet after breakfast at Raffaele's, then for lunch, afternoon they would hang at his, because he lived on his own. And at this point, Amanda learned that Meredith also started seeing a guy that lived downstairs, called Giacomo. So this relationship, again, according to different sources, has started off in October, but it's kind of been official for only 10 days before Meredith's death. But basically it led to the two of them not spending as much time together. So Halloween night is approaching, and Amanda, in all of this haze, you know, new relationship, basically living kind of somewhere else, is just last minute thinking of her costume, and there are a couple of messages between her and Meredith on that. Here we have two versions of events. What the family would be saying, that Meredith had told them about Amanda, you know, having a boyfriend, bringing men home, and having like really poor hygiene habits, but that wasn't really elaborated further on, at least it wasn't in the book. There's plenty of misinformation about that online. And then we have Amanda, who was saying that she was really good friends with Meredith. We pick up with the text from the Halloween night between the two of them, Amanda and Meredith. They're just chatting in Italian, like if they're going anywhere, does she have a costume? And if you look at the whole transcript, well, I'm looking at it, I can put a link in the description box. According to this transcript, I'm not sure if this is all of it, but before that, the last messages between the two of them were on the 18th of the 10th. So, not sure if that means something, but what it will mean for the prosecution later will that this is dodge, that they weren't as close as Amanda would say that they were. On November the 1st, because it was a bank holiday in Italy, Amanda decides to just have a chill day. So she wakes up late, and at around 1 p.m. Raffaele arrives to the cottage for the two of them to eat lunch. Meredith was there, so they just ate some pasta. Amanda was just playing a guitar and singing, and then Meredith did some laundry and also gave Amanda a fake tattoo. Then around 4 p.m. after lunch would be the last time Amanda would see Meredith alive, as she would leave to go to have her dinner with Sophie and her friends from uni and to watch Notebook and eat ice cream. Around 4 to 4:30 p.m. Meredith would arrive at that friend's house, so we do know that for sure. And then around 5 p.m. Amanda and Raffaele would leave the cottage to spend the night at Raffaele's. What this information doesn't reveal, and what I couldn't find anywhere, was what about the other people in the house? Filomena, we know, was at her boyfriend's, she was out of town. I couldn't find information on Laura. I couldn't find information on the people downstairs. Like, do we know? Do we have? And let me know if I glitched. I am going to pin the comment if anybody has reliable sources on this information. But I feel like had this had happened in the UK, in the US, you know, everybody in that house would have to give their alibi, would have to be like, I have left this house exactly at that time. When did they last leave the flat? You know, interrogation about have they locked the door? When were they to have returned? What was their alibi for the time? And that I just couldn't find. Let me know if you can. I'm going to eat my words up, and you should probably also start your own YouTube channel, and I will pin the comment. But with this cottage being empty between 8:30 and 8:45 p.m, somebody resembling Rudy Gude has been caught on the CCTV camera from the parking garage from across the road. In Rudy's prison diary entry, he would write about arriving at the cottage and seeing a white car with headlights on parked outside the front gates. And this, the police would say, is a detail only he could have known. There would be an eyewitness testimony here as well, saying that Rudy did arrive at the cottage at around 7:51, sort of just as he said, and once he was caught on the CCTV camera. And according to Amanda and Raffaele, at this point they were at Raffaele's flat. Following the timeline, just a couple of minutes before Rudy was supposedly seen at the CCTV camera, from Raffaele's flat, Amanda will send one last message to her boss. So she communicated with Patrick during the day about whether or not she should be coming in to work, and he said it was dead in the club because of the bank holiday, so she shouldn't go in. So she sends one text message saying, "See you later." Now, this message was sent in Italian, and later it will be dissected because of the version of events Raffaele was going to say had happened that night. But at 8:40 p.m, we have another eyewitness testifying that Amanda and Raffaele were where they said they were, in Raffaele's flat. This music student, Serbian represent, I guess, Jovana Popovic, ring the bell at Raffaele's flat to let him know that she doesn't need a ride to the train station, and she just told that to Amanda, who opened the door. Now, if that is true, and if looking at the text message, at the cell tower that text message was sent to, they were at Raffaele's flat. At 8:30, at 8:40, and then there's one signal at 9:30 from Raffaele's phone. From what I gathered, so we have to remember this is 2007. Phones were used differently, nobody had a need to be constantly on them, there was literally nothing to do but to call and text. So A, that's why they wouldn't have been using them constantly, but B, from at least this whole analysis, there just weren't as many pings. Like, you would have to make an action, you would have to send a text, or get an MMS, or make a call to somebody for it to actually ping and register the cell tower. But thinking about this in respect to where Rudy was, the hypothesis here, if the robbery has been staged, if the entrance to the cottage has been staged, is that somebody, Amanda, the key holder, would have to have let him in. So she would have had to be at her cottage by the time that Rudy was there, which would have taken her about 8 minutes. Nobody speaks about this, by the way. This is why investigations into this case drive me insane. I had to actually go onto Google Maps to look at the streets that were mentioned from the cell towers in order to calculate how long it would have taken to walk, and roughly it is 8 minutes. So is it doable from the moment that Amanda shut the door in the Serb's face and she went on her merry way? She would have already communicated with Patrick, "See you later," and then she just decides, to leave, get home, let Rudy in, he commits this murder, and then what? According to the computer data, that will also be up for debate, because they could have left the phones at home, gone to the cottage, committed this murder, and then just returned home and resumed their actions. But even in that sense, the computer data doesn't fully make the story flow. On Solicito's MacBook, the prosecution will drive the narrative that they found no human activity after 9:10 p.m. on November the 1st until 5:32 in the morning, and this is when somebody used it to play music for half an hour. Now, for this to make sense, we have to speak here briefly for a second about the time of death. So, Meredith's time of death, based off of the body temperature and the digestive process, was at first estimated to be between 8 p.m. on November the 1st and 4 a.m. on November the 2nd, with the probability the time of death occurred around 11 p.m. This is where we connect all of the details on the activity on Meredith's phones, on the account of her friends or where they dropped her home, because we know she didn't really make it home up until 9 p.m, which is when she tried to call her family back in the UK. Then there was the hour of inactivity, and then there were a couple of random actions after 10 p.m. So you can see if the time of death could have been 8-9 p.m, how that would have made it really hard for Amanda and Raffaele to just, in the nick of time, after they shut the door in Jovana's face, rush off to the cottage to let Rudy in and commit this whole murder. But what works better for the prosecution is if the time of death is actually established to be at around 11 p.m, because that would give them the ample amount of time. But does it make sense then with the CCTV footage of Rudy being at that location? And does it make sense with what we're going to be talking about going through this story? The whole staged break-in and the rest of the evidence. I will point it out when we come there, but just think about which one makes more sense, and is one party trying it harder for this to actually really fit in their narrative rather than looking at this objectively. Still at Raffaele's flat, still looking at the computer data, Amanda remembers they smoked a joint, they watched Amélie, and then they fell asleep. Now, the computer data will partially confirm that. It will confirm Amélie was played. And then his computer had VLC, sort of like a CD, DVD player, and it shows as if another movie has been just replayed, called Stardust. It seemed like this movie has been just put on and then replayed 5 times, and then that music was played for half an hour at around 5:30 a.m, and that was triggered by accident. The team behind Raffaele would say that the police never looked into the keyboard activity. So whether or not it was actually disabled, how does the data compare once they actually had their laptop in custody? The comparison was never done, and that's why they never looked into the data where they would have seen that the disabling of the keyboard happened at 5:36 a.m, and that was probably because that movie has been playing for about 5 times. Immediately, that was followed by a new interaction after 5 minutes. And here, I am led to believe from what I've seen, and it's written in a very ambiguous way, that this was actually somebody in charge of the computer. Then the music is played for about half an hour, and then the system remains inactive for the next 6. In short, what that means was that his team will conclude that there was activity happening overnight, unlike the police would have said. Now, whether or not they were sleeping in the room when that activity was going on is a different story. Something else that happened, and there's only one line on this, was that his computer will be the only one analyzed. So Amanda's computer, Meredith's, and even Philomena's would all have hard disk problems, making data difficult to retrieve. Which could be a coincidence or could be that the police just didn't handle those properly. Something that strikes me here that people don't speak about is rather the information that they haven't found, especially on the only laptop that we have here. And that is, we have spoken by now about their background, right? We have spoken about the charges, that they didn't have as clear, as clean of a criminal record as they said they did. However, none of these people, at least that we know of, has committed murder before. And usually, as we have spoken about so many individuals on this channel, when people do, they aren't just natural at it. They make stupid mistakes, they look things up, and we just don't have that kind of search history here. They don't strike me as the individuals that would have gone to the library or to use the computers there. Most of the time we know they have been spending at Raffaele's, that is supported by quite literally everything from data to people's statements. Mostly smoking, eating, enjoying movies, chilling, Amanda reading her Harry Potter chapters. So if we are saying that something had to be premeditated, Raffaele's flat would have potentially been the best location for that to have happened. According to Rotten Mango's account of Amanda's book, they have spent, before watching Amélie, that evening planning a road trip. So the next morning at 10:30 a.m., around 10:30 a.m., we don't know the exact time, Amanda wakes up and she decides to return to the cottage in order to take a shower. This section will be criticized by people, and even I'm gonna admit it does sound odd. So Raffaele's shower was perfectly functioning. His sink had been broken, and apparently Amanda had gone home to fetch a mop to then, clean his sink area that has leaked in the kitchen. But then she just went into the house and would eventually decide to have a shower after we speak about everything. That, and so that I don't forget to mention the road trip. That just has never been questioned, investigated, where I can see the account that this was planned, like where, when, how. I don't know if they have ever been questioned about it. Amanda leaves Raffaele's, so between 10:30 and 11:15, we don't really know the timeline here, but she returns to her cottage. So let us here now for the first time actually speak about the place in depth, how it looked like, because it's going to matter when it comes to what Amanda is about to encounter. So the cottage, first of all, had a driveway gate. So this one can be opened by key or with a buzzer, so somebody inside with the intercom can buzz you in. 4 women, Amanda, Meredith, Philomena and Laura, were in the upstairs flat, and then downstairs there were 4 men. The door on the upper flat actually had the grill, so basically it's like bars on the inside that you can put as the extra layer of protection, but this hasn't been used. And the front door latch was faulty and required deadbolt operation by key, both internally and externally, to keep that door closed. And the front door, once the police would arrive onto the scene, wouldn't show any signs of damage or attempts to break in. What it shows to me, and that's why I'm kind of pissed that we don't have everybody's account of when they left that cottage. When I look at the actual lock, it just looks like one of those simple ones, like you need the key. It doesn't seem to me like the door that would automatically shut behind somebody, meaning you have to manually lock it. Amanda would say that she would find the front door open, and it seemed like she called out the names and nobody was inside. So she goes in, closes the door, but doesn't lock it. If you look at the outline of the flat, so you have front door, then you have that living room, you have a smaller toilet on the right side, and you have Laura's room. And then in line, you have Philomena's, Amanda's, and Meredith's room, followed by the bigger toilet. We are gonna be calling bigger toilet shower toilet and the smaller one poop toilet. It will all make sense. I just can't have the toilet 1 and toilet 2. It just doesn't flow. So on the left, what Amanda should have noticed first would be that Philomena's room had been broken into, right? The broken window, all of that. But she would say that that door was closed. Then, as she is walking in, she doesn't notice anything else that is off. Like, there's no blood on the floor, there's nothing really out of the ordinary in that common area, in that corridor. As she's passing by the doors, all of the bedroom doors have been shut, there's nothing on the floor, there's no shoe prints, footprints in blood that she can see, and I mean, probably wasn't looking for that, she just was heading for the toilet. But she did leave the door unlocked according to her as well, which is kind of odd if you were just there to quite literally shower and then get the hell out. And once she gets into the toilet, she just goes into the shower, doesn't notice anything until she comes out, which is when she notices small drops of blood on the sink and then one big spot on the towel underneath. It's kind of like orange, reddish, but she tries to justify it to herself, like maybe somebody cut themselves shaving, maybe one of them had a period. You don't immediately resort to red flags panic. But that will soon change because Amanda goes into the other toilet because they kept their hair dryer there. So as she's drying her hair, she looks at the toilet and notices that there is some unflushed poop there. Now Amanda finds that odd and she doesn't flush the poop, she just kind of is spooked, so she picks up that mop and goes out to go to Raffaele's. Once she returns, Raffaele is awake, so she helps clean the kitchen floor with that mop. They have breakfast, and during breakfast she mentions what she saw in the cottage and sort of tries to assess does he find it weird as well. To which he says he does, and that she should call Filomena, who is sort of acting as the landlord of the place. And this is when Amanda does just that. Before that, she calls Meredith. We have spoken about these calls at the beginning, so between 12:07 and 12:11, she will make calls to both of Meredith's numbers. But these calls would only be few seconds long, 3 seconds and 4 seconds to be exact, according to the records. And she would sometimes later in the interrogation say that, it just kept ringing and she wasn't picking up the phone. Then the calls from 12:34 p.m. continue as they're heading home. Remember, 8 minutes walk. She would call her mom in Seattle, but it would be middle of the night there. And then she would have those 3 other calls with Filomena. Now, Filomena would say that it's kind of incorrect that the phones of Meredith, both of them, one she would know because she gave it to her, would just ring out. So the Italian one had the automated message by the end of the ring, and then her English one would ring without going to voicemail. And additionally to that, she would claim that Amanda told her on the phone that she was already at the cottage when she made those calls, but she was still at Raffaele's and just going back. Those two were completely different cell towers, as we know. At the cottage again, Amanda will finally open Filomena's room, and this is when the panic sets in, when she was to call her back, and then Filomena is gonna tell her to call the police, that they're coming. But here, Raffaele would say that the door to Filomena's room was already open at this point, later during the interrogation. Amanda would say that after discovering this, just before Raffaele called the police, she still tried to bang on Meredith's door. She was knocking louder and louder. She even went to that balcony to see if she can see anything from the window, but she couldn't see it because of the bad angle. So here Raffaele, before calling the police number, before calling 112, calls his sister, who worked for police in Rome, and she tells him to call 112 because that is the Universal European Emergency Services number, kind of like a switchboard so they can assess the situation and then direct you to the right department. They decide to wait outside, and in one account of events, Amanda will say that she has checked the toilet again just to see like if she was tripping, like what did she see, but that the poop was gone, as if somebody has flushed it, so she kind of convinced herself maybe she has had a slip of mind, maybe she just didn't know what she saw. But Raphael would later say that the poop was still there, so he doesn't know what was going on. What nobody mentions is just how high these two individuals were. And I know some of you are gonna be like, Maya, it's not acid, like, you know, the effects of it won't just last the next day. But nobody talks about it. If these two individuals were smoking regularly, it would have affected just this whole haziness that we are reading about. The mixed statements during that particular day, the fact that, you know, maybe you're not paranoid and then suddenly you are completely in a state of paranoia and everything seems like panic worthy, just nobody speaks about it. I don't know, just a wild idea that that might have been what contributed to this account of events. The postal police finally arrives. They will later have it on the record that Amanda said that Meredith would usually lock the room. And how odd it was that, you know, the recorded 112 call to the police made by Raffaele, during that call, he would claim that nothing had been stolen without having actually known or lived there to begin with. We spoke about it at the beginning of the video, whether you believe the earlier timeline or the later timeline here, who made it there first, and if so, if the police had made it there first, why would they have allowed these two individuals to actually then make the calls to the police or to anybody? And whichever version you believe in, that the police made it there at 12:35 or that they made it there after 12:50, this is still at least, let's just say roughly, Amanda made it back to the cottage by 11 a.m. That's still at least an hour and a half where she's noticing odd things, she isn't reporting it, instead she decides to actually go back to Raphael's, discuss it with him informally, and then only make a decision, and even then return, make all of these phone calls, prolong this as much as possible. Like, I'm saying I see why people see certain actions that Amanda has made extremely suspicious. Filomena now makes it to the scene with her boyfriend. They inspect her room and she finds it odd that nothing was stolen, that the glass has been just everywhere over her clothes. And the police also tells her why they're there, that they have found those phones, and this is when the panic sets in Filomena, because she knows Meredith wouldn't have just left her phones anywhere. Even if she was drunk, she wouldn't have just left them in someone's garden. So here is when the police, well, asks for permission to actually enter the room, and when Filomena's boyfriend breaks the door down. Amanda wouldn't be one of the people by the door, so she didn't see how Meredith's body had been found. Neither would Raphael. However, here they would later, once we speak about the fingerprints and the evidence, fingerprints of Raphael's would be found on Laura's door. So we don't really know where he was during this process, which again to me means shitty reporting on the police's part. Like, there are not even that many people in that house. Why are we not keeping count of what they're doing and where they're at? But possibly he was somewhere in that area by the toilet and Laura's room. Around 3 p.m., Amanda and Raphael would be taken into the police station, and the police officers would note that small scratch that I mentioned in the beginning of the video on her neck. According to her flatmates, this scratch just wasn't there the day before. She would say that this was a hickey, but then this doesn't have any resemblance of a hickey. A pathologist would later conclude that the mark looks like extremely non-specific skin irritation. So like, there's no broken skin or marks of fingernail scratching. But no defensive wounds would be found on either Amanda or Raphael, and you have to wonder why. If we are again saying this is their first time committing one of the most brutal attacks, they just nailed it. They just figured it out how to do it so perfectly that there's just no scratches, no defensive wounds on any of them. And I know, and we'll speak about it, the multiple attacker theory, but still, even if it is three people attacking one person, you have to think somebody like Meredith with some martial arts experience would have put up the fight. And the murder weapon here was a knife, just further decreasing the chances that none of these people would have had some wounds on them if they were actually inside of that room. Once Amanda and Raffaele were brought to the police station, their behavior was just found odd by everybody else. The way I see it, based off of Rotten Mango podcast description, was that Amanda was just going through a meltdown. But people will see this behavior as extremely odd, that she wasn't, crying, breaking down. However, she was displaying stress in different ways. She would be saying things like, "Why did it happen while I wasn't there?" She would be hitting her forehead with a palm, just repeating, "No, no, no," sort of as a coping mechanism. But everything she would do would either be seen as too much emotion, faking it, or simply no emotion. And when they weren't in the interrogation rooms with the police, Raphael would be comforting her. She would sit on his lap and he would kind of rock her back and forth. He would make goofy faces to just make her smile and distract her so that she doesn't have a full-on mental breakdown. She even took a journal out, started writing in it for about an hour to distract herself. And here she would write that she'd kill for a pizza, but it doesn't seem like the right saying then and there, which is tone deaf, and she could have kept it only in her head. But again, just under this amount of stress, she's displaying all sorts of behavior. According to Amanda, she would only have slept 2 hours that night, and then she was pulled in back to be questioned. They would even bring her to the cottage to get her to speak about how she found everything. Then after other 8 hours of interrogation, whenever she would get the chance to call her family, her aunt would be telling her to go back to the US, that she needs to get a lawyer. Her mom would say that she's on the way to Italy, but everybody else had lawyered up, she needs to as well, and that she should go to the embassy, to the American embassy in Italy. But she doesn't get it. Like, she just thought innocent people don't do things like this. They don't need to lawyer up. Like, I'm literally helping them solve this case. She didn't realize that she was already being seen as the prime suspect. As she was brought into the police station one last time, just while waiting to be interrogated again, she's chatting with this officer casually in the waiting room, and they ask her about the men that would come to the house. And here is when she would first mention the guy that played basketball, that he came around a few times, but only to the flat downstairs. And here she was kind of feeling stiff, she started stretching, and the officer makes a comment on how flexible she is. Can she do a split? So she does it, and then the head of homicide comes out and is like, "What the hell is happening? Why are you acting weird all the time? You're either with your boyfriend or like you're making splits, making cartwheels here when people ask you to." And the other officer, of course, didn't want to admit that this has been their idea. It's just, again, how Amanda has been seen by the whole police station. Here is when they bring her in, and during the night of the 6th of November, Amanda will make 2 signed statements, and she will be arrested to spend first of 1,427 days in prison, which, if you don't calculate your child's age by months, is almost 4 years. It's about 3 years and 9 months. What will both ensure that Amanda spends almost 4 years in prison and in turn would exonerate her is the evidence that was found at that cottage. So let us break it down room by room, and first let's start off with the collection of that evidence. Now that you know what this cottage looks like, I will either play the videos if, again, copyright allows for it, or I will put as many images as I can showing you how this evidence was collected. So if you look at these videos, you kind of see people covered head to toe using gloves. To you and me, it just looks like it has been done properly. It looks like there shouldn't be any contamination. But Amanda's defense team, and later the team that would exonerate her, would say that the evidence collection just wasn't done properly. In particular, the gloves haven't been changed after each and every sample was taken. To illustrate this, let's say you have a swab and you're taking a sample on both sides of that swab. Now with that blood then gets all over the glove. So this isn't a problem if you were to change the glove between samples, but you can see, people in these videos not doing that. There would be pictures of just gloves being disposed on the floor, not being properly disposed. Then that floor being trashed, once they were actually taking things out, looking for evidence, they have trashed those floors before they even sprayed luminol to look for further DNA. The contamination during the evidence collection would later be used by Amanda, justifiably so if it actually happened, in order to put the seed of doubt into how the whole investigation was conducted, and to put in question all of the evidence that was found in each and every one of those rooms. Moving on to the point of entry. So the version of events here that the prosecution will present was that this robbery, apparent robbery, has been completely staged. That the entrance wasn't actually Filomena's window, rather than Amanda or somebody let Rudy into the house, and that is the actual point of entry. In order to break down Filomena's room, you kind of have to see how that cottage looks from the outside, and to know that there is about 3.5 meters from the ground to Filomena's window. That in itself would be tricky, but there is a window right underneath Filomena's one that this person could have used for support. But first question, why not go for an easy access? Why not rob the flat downstairs? And the evidence will prove that Rudy was one of the people inside, like that will never be completely negated. So Rudy also, as we know, was friends with the people downstairs. My own hypothesis there is maybe he thought he won't get caught. He will just go upstairs, follow his usual pattern where he breaks in, robs the place, and then just gets out. Nobody knows. The next day or whenever he speaks with his friends again, he just acts shocked, like, oh wow, somebody robbed the place above. He knew the location already, so maybe that was what appealed to him, like he already knew sort of the exit points. But the entry point still, in that regard, doesn't make sense, because he or whoever would have had to climb sort of on the side of the cottage. And then, not just that they would have had to climb and do some Spider-Man moves and jump right up in the air onto this window, but Filomena would say later that her shutters were closed. So they weren't latched, they weren't locked, but this person would have had to be on the side, somehow jump up onto those shutters to open them up, and then, I don't know, jump down, climb down using that window underneath, find an adequate rock, which would have to be a huge one that maybe somebody would have in the bag, or just find, due to convenience, nearby, break that window, smash it, and then, without cutting themselves and leaving blood inside of Filomena's room, climb up that window, for that to be the entry point. Things that don't make sense here is that there was a rock that was found, but it seemed to be too big. It was 20 centimeters wide and about 4.5 kgs in weight, which would be a large and a heavy rock, to throw at a window that is between 3.5 and 4 meters up. Beyond that, the point of entry was also illogical, because this burglar would have to start at the front door, walk around the side of the cottage, down the stairs to the back of the house. And there is a door at the lower floor apartment and another low balcony, where he would have had all the privacy to break into the flat. And after this case had happened, actually there were 2 other burglaries, and nobody had ever used that point of entry that was used in this case. Everybody would just jump over that balcony. The area underneath the window isn't trampled. There's no blood on the glass, and if this burglar is using that window to climb through it after they have thrown the rock at it, they would have inevitably cut themselves. Because of how they would have had to position themselves in order to even jump onto this window, they could have been seen by the public, because this was open to view 3 times. So the first time when they're jumping onto the shutters, then when they're back using the rock to break it, and then finally when they're trying to use it as the entry point again. And then the room in itself looks staged. Nothing had been stolen from the actual room that was the point of entry, with the laptop, with the camera, and with the jewelry right there exposed for them to take. This would have been already probably enough to convince most of us that this burglary had indeed been staged and that that wasn't the point of entry. But then the police would also find some DNA after they sprayed luminol, meaning that somebody tried to wipe it from the room. And this DNA would be some footprints of Gude's, Amanda's, mixed with Meredith's DNA. So, of course, suddenly the option isn't that this was the point of entry, rather somebody entered through the front door, went to Meredith's room to murder her, after which they entered Philomena's room in order to stage this robbery, because otherwise Meredith's DNA wouldn't have been found here. So all of this would lead the prosecution to conclude that this has indeed been staged. Now, Amanda's version of events was that there was a way for Rudy, a basketball player, somebody who is 180 centimeters tall, who is athletic, to have climbed onto that ledge and then pulled himself up after he broke that window. With the right hand holding onto the wall corner, Rudy could have reached out with his left one and grabbed the nearest shutter and pulled it open. She had given different accounts of how he could have used the floor below, that window that is positioned underneath, or how once his right foot was positioned there, he could have hooked his right hand onto the concrete planter and then stretched his left leg and foot out along the wall until his left one would rest on the top of the horizontal bar of the lower window. Then, by grabbing the shutters, he can transfer the weight onto the horizontal bar and proceed to take the final steps to gain entrance into her room. There were pieces of glass that were found on top of the clothing on the floor and the notebook computer. She would say that this was Rudy's known modus operandi, that he would usually carry a rock, which we spoke about. It is true that he would usually have the rucksack on him and would have either a knife or a hammer, something to actually break the window and break into the flats. The lack of physical evidence, so the trampling on the ground, is due to it having rained the night before. I have checked the only website where I could find like historical weather forecast, and it said partly cloudy. I couldn't really see that it rained, and I have a feeling again somebody should have probably logged that and would have known of that. On all of the pictures and the videos, I don't see that the ground was damp or anything like that. But the main argument that Amanda had was that the burglary did happen because Meredith's rent had been stolen. So yes, maybe they broke in, they didn't steal anything from Philomena's room, but they have definitely stolen it from the room where Meredith had been killed. Most accounts online state that the rent money was 250 euros. that she was supposed to pay on that day, so on the 1st, but Filomena was out with her boyfriend, so that's why that money hasn't been paid. But we know that Meredith had withdrawn this money 2 days ago from the ATM machine and that it was missing from the flat. Other things that were missing from Meredith's purse were also her cell phones, so 2 phones that were found in the garden, her credit cards, and also her keys, because if you remember, her door had been locked. When Amanda was later searched in the police station, the police would found around 215 euros on her. And we actually know this because this is the money that she will add to her prison account, to her funds in prison, once she was put behind bars. So nobody kind of made the connection before that I could find, where regardless if the rent money was 250 or around 300 euros, if this had happened there, she had called the police, then what is the theory there? That Amanda had kept the money, that is why she had it on her, that Rudy would have just entered the house, they would have staged, they would have gotten through all of that effort for her to keep most of it. Like, what is the theory here? Because these two things are kind of connected, where people are like, well, there was money found on Amanda, indicating that, she had sort of organized this, that she was behind it, that she knew that the rent money would be in Meredith's room, and then what? She just keeps 90 something percent of it. And if you're already ahead of me thinking about what about the credit cards, Maya, Meredith probably had more money on those. Have they ever looked into that? The story about this is so convoluted, but I might as well talk about it here. So the director of a bank would be testifying in court, and this would be in 2009. And he will basically tell, from what I could see, that they couldn't actually pinpoint which ATM machine the cards have been used at, but that somebody did, according to him, attempt to withdraw money on the 2nd of November, so the day after Meredith was murdered, but it was something like 20 euros, so something minimal. And that he couldn't be sure of that. I don't know how else to explain this, but by using the pending and the current balance in your bank account, so they couldn't determine if the money had been withdrawn a few days earlier by Meredith, so that she had withdrawn the rent and then also the pocket money, and that just didn't sync as being withdrawn on the same date. So basically, they had nothing when it came to the credit cards, and this was in 2009. So again, makes you wonder, did they look in time? Because in 2007, or like throughout those 2 years, there were also reports of, well, maybe the British bank should have been contacted because, it was the UK card, to figure out the exact date and all of that precisely. But the only account I could find on the cards was from the testimony of the director of that bank. And I'll be putting them on the screen to see if you can read them and find something that I haven't in those. They are just convoluted bunch of nothingness. That also doesn't help because it could have painted a picture of what happened, why those cards might have actually been stolen, was there an actual motivation for the robbery here? And also the lack of that data then shows why was there a tunnel vision. Did they already have somebody in mind from the get-go that they didn't actually focus on all of these things that could have proven somebody else was behind this? We have the supposed point of entry. Then the person goes into Meredith's room, they commit the murder, they take all of the valuables out of her purse, they make sure to take the keys in order to lock the door so that nobody suspects something, so that they have time to run and to flee. And then, of course, because this was a bloody scene, they would have left their shoe prints towards the exit point, which would prove to be the front door of the house. However, with the shoe prints comes another possibility. One was that they were missing bloody footprints, which made it impossible, according to the prosecution, for Rudy to be the person who locked the door. So the missing shoe print here would have been the one when somebody would face the door to lock it and then they were to turn. That shoe print just wasn't there. This would lead investigators to believe that Rudy didn't act alone, and the only other evidence in that cottage belonged to Amanda and Raffaele. The shoe prints were found in Meredith's room and then in Filomena's room as well, and a shoe print made in blood was discovered on the pillow found under Meredith's body. The police experts would testify that that print was made by a woman's shoe, the same size of Amanda Knox's, but her defense team would testify that the print was actually compatible with Rudy's much larger shoes. Amanda's team would later show that the shoe that was attributed to her was in fact a partial shoe print from Rudy's Nike Outbreak 2 shoes, and that all of the shoe prints actually belonged to Rudy. And here with the shoe prints and especially with the footprints as well, it's a lot like with the majority of this case. Like when you hear it, you're immediately jumping to conclusions, and then when you actually have a visual of it, you kind of can buy into the theory that Amanda is trying to present. Because it just seems like all of this evidence had to be blown up a few times, data had to be extracted, it would allow for contamination, it can be interpreted two different ways. So now we know where the entry point, supposed entry point was, and then the exit point. So let's move on to footprints. What footprints entail was that somebody was walking barefoot. I know that that sounds dumb, but this means that luminol had to be used. They weren't visible to the human eye. That's why the theory that Amanda could have just gotten into the house and hadn't noticed anything can to a certain degree be plausible. Before I show you the pictures, again, just listen to the evidence that was found. So half of a bloody footprint was found on the bath mat in the shower toilet. That footprint would match Raffaele's right foot size and characteristics. Now, 5 luminol-revealed footprints were found on the floor in the corridor and in Amanda's bedroom. 2 of those footprints would be compatible with Amanda's right foot, and none of the luminol-revealed footprints were compatible with Rudy, meaning that he was in his shoes while the other 2 were barefoot. This is when Amanda's defense team would jump in, because how are we supposed to believe that either they have done such a great cleanup job where only luminol would have revealed the footprints, whereas the shoe prints would have just been left there to be visible to the naked eye. And also there was never an explanation offered as to how would that have feasibly happened. Them just hopping around, making sure that they are barefoot on this crime scene in order to be able to clean that up later so that nobody can connect the shoe prints to their shoes. Then looking at this diagram that Amanda's website would provide, you can also start to actually picture how this crime had happened. Because we have the poop bathroom in the bottom left corner that was intact. Meaning that whatever the point of entry was, Rudy would have taken his dump in that poop toilet. We would know that this was Rudy because of the toilet paper that was used. There's where they would have found his DNA, which is so weird to me that they couldn't actually figure it out from the poop itself. I don't know what was going on in this case, but anyways, he poops there, might have then been interrupted or had realized that somebody had actually gotten home, and then he decides to get out. Maybe Meredith notices that he is there, he corners her in her room, that's where the murder happens, and then if we are following those red dots, he simply goes out and goes straight to the front door. The one red dot in the shower bathroom is Solicito's footprint. And then all of the blue ones in Filomena's room, in Amanda's room, and in the corridor are supposedly discovered under luminol. And now we'll look at the picture of how those luminol footprints look like, and you can again buy into Amanda's stories because they don't even look like footprints, they look like blobs. Amanda's team would prove that all of those stains that the prosecution would call footprints were actually negative for blood, and that they have been swabbed and tested for DNA. None of them tested positive for Meredith's DNA. And now that just doesn't make sense, does it? If Amanda was on the scene of the crime, if she was behind the crime, and if so was Raffaele, then how was Meredith's DNA not in all of those footprints recovered in luminol? This, I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't completely understand in terms of that there was no blood in the luminol detected footprints. So I know luminol can flag up bleach as well, but doesn't it only flag up blood? And if so, where did this blood come from? If anybody knows that in the comments, that is still like one of the baffling questions that I have here. If anybody knows, let me know in the comments. But according to Amanda's team, no DNA and no Meredith's DNA, proving that this is a bogus theory and that her blood was never actually mixed with Meredith's. Still speaking of footprints in Filomena's room, as I mentioned, there was some DNA evidence found by luminol revealed bloodstain containing Amanda's and Meredith's DNA. But Amanda would later be able to prove that again, this was where the gloves came into play, that the forensics team went into the room where Meredith was murdered first, didn't change the gloves, and then swabbed the footprints from Filomena's room, contaminating the evidence. Moving on to the shower toilet, this is where the evidence collection will show another mix of Meredith's and Amanda's blood in those drops in the sink. However, this can be explained by the two of them using the same household. Amanda would later also be able to prove that there was further contamination there, considering that they had the videos of how this evidence was collected. And here, with this toilet in particular, the destruction of her character really began, because a bathroom picture started circulating the internet shortly after she was arrested, and immediately the public started forming an opinion. And this picture was of the bathroom sink that was sprayed with a chemical that turns pink when it comes to contact with protein. So once they sprayed this, the whole sink looked all pink, sort of reddish, depending again if you can use a filter on it. It looked bloody. It looked like a murder bath has happened right there in that bathroom. Rather, what Amanda saw that morning and what those forensics teams would collect was simply a couple of drops of blood in that sink that was otherwise completely white. So in this toilet, we again have Amanda proving how the samples have been collected, how the forensic team rubbed the thumb repeatedly over the sample, how they didn't change the gloves, rather they used the same gloves to collect the samples that belong to both Meredith and then Amanda. And when it comes to Sollecito's footprint, well, that again, when you look at it, for us, you kind of see with this one, okay, I can buy that this was a footprint. But this, just like with the shoe prints, had to be blown up to match Sollecito's right foot. And also, if he was to be the person in the shower, has gotten out of it to leave that footprint, there is no other genetic trace of Raffaele that was found in that toilet. Anything, skin shedding, fingerprints, anything that would actually 100% confirm that this was Raffaele who was in this toilet. The mixed DNA found in all of those locations definitely look incriminating, but what they could never find was any form of mixed fingerprints, so any fingerprints of Amanda really, and that applies to most of the flat, which is bizarre in itself because Amanda's fingerprints were only found on a glass in a kitchen, so none of them were found in her own bedroom or anywhere else in the cottage. which either means that Amanda has somehow done such a great job of wiping her whole existence from this place, or did the forensics team just not take fingerprints from every single room? Because they would find Raffaele's fingerprints on Meredith's bedroom and also on the inside face of Laura's door, which is where he didn't have any business to be doing. And then, of course, there were Rudy's fingerprints that were found inside of Meredith's bedroom. But also, what this means was that there were no fingerprints in the staged room, in Filomena's room. Only 2 prints were found, and both of them belonged to Filomena herself. One was on the wardrobe door, and the other one on the inside of the door out into the passage. And in Amanda's own room, there were 3 fingerprints on the window that were unattributable, so they couldn't find who they belonged to, and then 2 more on the wardrobe doors that were also of somebody unknown. Here, the proposition by the prosecution would be that Amanda had done a great job cleaning her fingerprints. But here, Amanda's defense team would say that anything, any kind of attempt to remove the fingerprints would leave some smudges, and they just didn't find anything to that effect. They didn't find that there was an attempt to wipe her own existence from that cottage. The only room where no evidence was found, except from that one fingerprint that Raffaele supposedly left there, was Laura's. And now that we have recreated what that whole house looks like, if you are thinking the same thing that I was thinking, well, first of all, I don't know why you haven't subscribed yet. Do it. Do it right now. Immediate best friends. But where my mind went here was there any unknown DNA? We have spoken about these unattributable fingerprints. Was there anything to give the police the idea that maybe somebody else was here? Whether it was Rudy acting with somebody else, whether it was somebody else completely acting on their own, or just in general, whether there was any other option. Out of over 480 DNA tests, only about 193 could actually yield DNA useful for comparison. That's about 40%. And out of those 480, 93 were hairs or fibers. And hair isn't the best when it comes to DNA, so they could identify the colors, like black, blonde, chestnut, light chestnut, and red chestnut hair. But basically they could not 100% say whose hair that was. 24 tests were from samples taken from Meredith's body, and of those, 1 would yield DNA compatible with Gude, 17 DNA compatible with Meredith, and remaining DNA wasn't useful for comparison. Now, 3 tests yielded DNA compatible with an unknown male, and the remaining didn't yield DNA useful for comparison once they examined that whole flat. And when they looked outside the cottage, they found 4 samples where DNA was compatible with an unknown male or an unknown female. In short, that means there is a chance. There has been unknown male and, according to the sources, female DNA also found at the scene. And here is where I have a huge gap, where I have no idea if those records, if those tests are still on file, if they have been stored somewhere, if they have ever been used. In Italy, according to, again, the internet DNA database, kind of like CODIS, I was thinking about that, was only established, from what I could see, in 2016. My thought process here is, if there is a CODIS, if there is a DNA database where now somebody can put those old samples from 2007 of the unknown individuals, if they still have them on file, then maybe something would pop up. If there were any recent crimes, if there was anybody input into the database since then, and we could actually catch a person that those samples belong to. And possibly then that would clarify for us whether or not there was somebody there who shouldn't have been, who did those unknown samples actually belong to. And you might say the chances of that are slim, but it opens up a whole new possibility that will soon become prevalent in this case. Were there multiple intruders here? And if so, who else was in there? And if not, Amanda and Raffaele, who would end up being exonerated, then who was Rudy's accomplice? According to Amanda's website, this also does provide a bigger picture because Filomena's and Laura's DNA was apparently never tested, compared to any of those blobs, any of the DNA evidence. And I understand that if they had alibis, etc., but it also kind of just proves that the police and the prosecution already had a plan on what could have happened on the scene of the crime, and they were only looking to compare those samples to Amanda, Raffaele, and Rudy. Before we finally go into the Meredith's room and describe the scene of the crime, let us just recap what sounds probable so far, just when you picture that whole blood evidence. Now that you have the picture of how that flat looked like, the fingerprints, the footprints, the shoe prints, what sounds like a plausible entry point, what sounds like a plausible exit point to you? If you want, pause this video now and tell me what makes sense. One thing that we know for sure, regardless of the entry point, whether it was the front door and something sinister happened, somebody let him in, or somebody forgot to lock it, or whether it was Filomena's bedroom, Rudy entered that flat that evening and he went to take a poop in that poo toilet, toilet number 1. During that time, most probably, the story that makes sense to me is that Meredith returned home. And if we are following the evidence from CCTV, the evidence from Meredith's phone, in my head it makes sense that this happened closer to 9 p.m. That then he realized, okay, I can't flush the toilet now because somebody has just come home, I can't rob this house, possibly I need to skedaddle, I need to escape, I need to find something to steal as well. Whatever the thought process here was, at some point Meredith notices something is going on, he confronts her, sexually assaults her, as we will learn, and then murders her. After that, he just, following those red steps, if you remember from the picture, gets out of that flat through the front door. That is the simple version that doesn't fully make sense because there would have to be the presence of somebody else who would have locked Meredith's room, who would have then cleaned up those blobs, those footprints, who would have left the bloody footprint on the bath mat in the shower toilet. Somebody to stage the whole break-in in Filomena's room, because if there is one thing that I'm not buying is that that was the entry point. After seeing all of the pictures, people trying to play Spider-Man on that wall, I just don't buy that this would be a plausible option for somebody to enter. Meaning that for many people, the multiple attacker theory starts becoming more and more plausible. And that does not change as we enter the actual scene of the crime, Meredith's room. Inside of her room, blood was found by the far wall, on and inside of the closet, under the desk, by and under the bed, on the walls above it, on the mattress cover, on the floor in large quantities, and also on the door of the bedroom. Only the mattress cover was still on the bed, because after the assault, somebody removed the duvet, pillow, and the bedsheet and placed Meredith on the bedsheet, on the 2 towels and pillow on the floor, and then covered her body with that duvet. They left Meredith's bag on that bag, but have taken the credit cards, they have taken her wallet, the phones, and the keys. And it seems like in that haste, as they have covered the body with the duvet and have been going through the bag, they have also just spread some of the receipts on top of Meredith, on top of her duvet. The The police would find an empty jar of Vaseline on her desk. They would find the closet. It seemed like it had been knocked around, and objects on the shelf were tipped over. And then they would find a nightstand lamp that belonged to Meredith and another lamp that belonged to Amanda. Both of them seemed to be placed by the floor next to the bed, as if somebody had maybe been looking for something, whether it is underneath the bed or elsewhere. Thinking about just how sporadic even some of the actions that are happening within that room seem, just like, placing the lamps underneath the bed, making sure they're at the foot of the bed, but then spreading all of the receipts on top of duvet, but still making sure that Meredith is placed on her pillows, sort of on the towels, to be in a way comfortable, and then placing the duvet on top of her, trying to either preserve her dignity or possibly you feel sorry for her, but then taking all of the credit cards and the keys, together with the fact that somebody did lock the room, but then there was no footprint. And also together with the disposal of the phones, but the fact that we don't know what they have done with the keys and the credit cards later, kind of puts the seed into your head that these were two different people and that also they are completely different personality-wise. One person seems to be more chaotic, more careless in a way, something that followed Rudy's pattern as we know from the background. And then the other person seems to be almost caring, like they feel sorry for what had happened here. They're still trying to preserve Meredith's dignity, because we will learn that Rudy had sexually assaulted Meredith. So if you were to sexually assault somebody and then you plan to rob them, you wouldn't really bother to make them lie on a pillow, on a towel, to cover them with a duvet. That's the kind of like psychology I'm talking about here. It seems like either he has, I don't know, dual personality, where he's switching between one and the other as he's committing this crime, or there is a completely different person here. Meredith's underwear was removed, both her bra and panties. Her panties didn't have any blood stains, and her bra was removed after she was dead, and that is determined because of the blood speckles on the bra that were not found on her chest. There was no semen, but there was internal bleeding that proved sexual assault, and then internal vaginal bruising that she had suffered before her death. Meredith sustained 43 wounds during the assault. There were 10 knife wounds and 33 other wounds. She had at least 15 bruises across her face, her jaw, neck, elbows, right forearm, small one on the back, then left thigh and right lower leg. These bruises indicated to the detectives that she wasn't only restrained but also was kept from screaming for help. They could determine that she had only 2 major knife wounds, one on each side of the neck, and this would in turn mean there were probably multiple attackers, because it seemed like 2 different knives have been used of 2 different sizes, based off of the small and the bigger cuts. And her defensive wounds were virtually non-existent, especially if you compare it to other single attacker knife attacks, where knife wounds on the hands and arms are usually prevalent. The way that Meredith's body was positioned told detectives that she had actually been moved from in front of the wardrobe to the center of the room. They could tell that because her bra was soaked in blood but was found in the area that didn't have any, and also because it seemed like there were drag marks pointing in that direction, so that her body was intentionally put on all of those items and then covered with a duvet. Blood pattern would reveal to them that Meredith was fatally stabbed, so the last wound that took her life actually happened around 40 centimeters above the ground, near the closet door, after which she had been dragged and positioned in such a way where somebody would only see her foot once they entered that room. So let me run you through the prosecutor's theory. They would call this the sex game scenario, and this scenario, according to them, happened following the later timeline, so after 11 p.m. So the supposition here is Meredith came home, she was on her bed, just chilling on her phone, all of those actions that happened after 10 p.m. were all done by her. And then, possibly at some point, Amanda and Raffaele return and they bring Rudy in. Rudy goes to take a dump in the toilet while either they wait for him to get out, or because he doesn't flush that toilet, maybe Amanda and Raffaele are already in Meredith's room. They already overpower her. Rudy joins them. Now there's three of them against Meredith, which would explain the lack of defensive wounds. They try to take her trousers down, she's resisting, and that's why she's obtaining all of those wounds across her body. Then at some point, both Amanda and Raffaele take their knives out, which would be matching all of the different cuts on her, while Rudy proceeds to sexually assault her, while the other two are overpowering her. However, this fight still ensues. The whole attack was determined to have happened within 15 minutes, and it's all happening by that closet. So while Amanda and Raffaele are supposedly holding her, she's on her knees while she's being assaulted, and we know that because of the last fatal knife wound. Sexual assault happens, Amanda strikes the final blow to her neck, and then they try to stage the scene. So one person or two of them are trying to make Meredith not be revealed by whoever was to open that door, while the other person is trying to take the money and the credit cards out of her purse and then leave. Blood traces that they found on the mattress would show them that one or more knives were kind of carelessly placed on the mattress cover as they were probably going through the bag. And then there were other blood traces under the bed that indicated that somebody probably used one of those lamps to search for something after the assault. But one of those lamps was, as I mentioned, Amanda's lamp. And this lamp was said to have been her only source of lighting in her room. So, how did that lamp end up in Meredith's room? We don't know the explanation to that. Amanda herself said that she never noticed that the lamp was missing, so she never borrowed it to Meredith. Meredith probably wouldn't have gone into Amanda's room to take her lamp because she had her own that was functioning, as was the other light in Meredith's room. So somebody took this lamp from Amanda's room for whatever reason, took it to Meredith's to search for something, and that somebody, based off of the luminol footprints in Amanda's room, had to be either Amanda or Raffaele. And the lamp that was found at the foot of Meredith's bed didn't have anybody's fingerprints on it. So they looked for something and then made sure that they wiped the blood or simply the fingerprints if only one person, Rudy, was bloodied up in the room. Here, more than ever, I need your detective hats on because I have been racking my brain around this and I can't think of any plausible explanation. Because for Amanda's lamp to be in that room, whoever the people behind this were had to be desperate. Why? Why not use other sources of light? Maybe not to alert the neighbors that something was actually going on in the room. Maybe they thought the blood can be seen from it, but why? And then why wipe the fingerprints? And why did Amanda never fully explain that? I'd like to know if you can think of what would they be searching for, because all of the valuables that people have known of had already been taken. Rather, like the money, the cards, all of that. So what would they have been searching for? Would they have been looking for their own fingerprints to see if they have cleaned the scene up correctly? Because they didn't. There was so many drag marks and blood just in general. So I just can't wrap my head around it. Speaking about fingerprints that were found in Meredith's room, they belonged to Meredith. Then there were two unattributable prints on the desk, and 2 on the door, then 2 prints matching Raffaele on the outside of Meredith's door, and some matching Rudy. But then there were also 2 prints matching Giacomo, the guy from downstairs that started dating Meredith. I'm not trying to start a conspiracy theory, let me just be clear on this one, but it just shows to me that they never really looked into this. I have found testimony, so they interviewed Giacomo. He has confirmed that Rudy had been to their flat twice, that he even fell asleep on the toilet, that he was interested in Amanda, everything that we already know. But he was never looked into as a suspect, so they probably did collect his prints because they knew that they were found in the room, but beyond that, they just never looked into him. I'm not saying that they should have, he probably had an alibi, etc. But usually people do look into the boyfriends, the significant others first, and here is just one more thing that adds to the whole tunnel vision aspect of this story. Based off of the evidence found in Meredith's room, yes, a lot of things are left to speculation. The whole lamp, why steal certain things, why kill her near the closet and then drag the body, why cover it. However, the DNA wasn't. Good as DNA was there. It was found on Meredith's purse, on the left sleeve of her sweat jacket, on her bra strap, and also on the toilet paper in that large bathroom. So we know that he was for sure on the scene of the crime when Meredith was killed. However, the other DNA evidence tying the other 2, the smoking guns that the prosecution will have, will be one such bra clasp that was found here inside of the room and the supposed murder weapon, the knife. So let us wrap this part up with these 2 items. I didn't think I will be finishing it there, but I need to because it has been about 7 hours that I have been sitting on and off recording, so yeah, I can't even estimate things no more. The bra clasp. Okay, a recap on this is that this really, whatever you think about how the evidence was collected, this part was messed up. And it could have been the part that could have sent one of these people behind bars forever, and it just wasn't, and it's so frustrating. The forensics team, on the first day when they were collecting evidence, found Meredith's bra clasp under the pillow. They somehow forgot to collect it. Like, there are pictures of it, they forgot to collect it. And then 47 days later, that bra clasp would be brought into evidence and then tested after being trampled, after this area being contaminated and God knows what for 47 days. The bra clasp would contain Meredith's DNA and Raffaele's. So if that was to be correct, then of course that would mean that Raffaele was the person to take her bra off, meaning that he would have been present during the assault and that he would have been one of the attackers. However, because of the contamination, later Amanda and Raffaele's team would conduct tests that determined that the presence of the blood on bra clasps yielded a negative result. This means no presence of DNA. And the same kind of situation was to happen with the second smoking gun, the supposed murder weapon. Here, the knife that the prosecution will call the murder weapon was found in Raffaele's flat. Upon entering his flat, the police would have said to have immediately smelled bleach, like immediately somebody tried to mask something to clean up the crime scene. And even in the videos that I have watched of the collection of the evidence, they keep opening up the drawers, they keep pointing to the bleach, like there was bleach in there. They keep taking pictures of the receipts and they're gonna show, those receipts confirm that the bleach had been bought. And then you see the dates on the receipts and they're from like February and March, and some of them literally state pizzeria. And you kind of wonder, like, okay, I mean, if this is what we are using as proof, I can kind of see how somebody would end up finding some leeways here and some loopholes in order to get themselves exonerated after some time. If we are saying, you know, person has bought bleach, but it says pizza on the receipt, it's just the mistakes are just there. And then they open up the drawer and immediately they suspect a certain knife. They eye it out and they send it for testing. And this knife would have said to had Meredith's DNA on the blade and then Amanda's DNA on the handle. Now, Amanda had used knives at Raffaele's place in order to cut things when she was cooking. They would be eating there. So Amanda's DNA had reason to be on that handle. Meredith's didn't. To make sure I'm making myself clear, they picked the clean knife because it looked too clean to them, like there wasn't blood on it. And then they tested it in the lab to prove that indeed Meredith's DNA has been scrubbed. So it looked like it had been cleaned thoroughly, but still they managed somehow to pick on Meredith's DNA. And then on the note of other knives being used, well, they have taken into evidence other pocket knives that Raffaele had, and here they found Amanda's and Raffaele's DNA on those. But because Meredith's wasn't there, they just discarded those. Those were never looked into as potential murder weapons. When it comes to the double DNA knife, so the one that had Meredith's blood on it supposedly, Amanda will later, with the help of her team of course, manage to prove that that couldn't have been a murder weapon because of the size of the wounds. Like the knife was just way too big to make the wounds both in width and depth that were inflicted on Meredith. So the wounds inflicted to Meredith would be 1.5 centimeters wide, while that knife, even just at the tip, was 2.2 centimeters wide. Also, the knife doesn't match the bloody outline that was left on the bedding, which raises $1 million question. Was the murder weapon ever found? If not, what are the theories there? Was it dropped somewhere by that careless person who also dropped the phones but didn't drop anything else? Is it still in somebody's flat, just like Meredith's key and cards? Because those items have never been found in Rudy's flat, who was careless enough to leave the scene of the crime the way he did and to drop the phones so that they are not connected to him in somebody's garden. Just something to ponder on. The evidence that would seal Amanda's fate would be the one on the blade of that knife, Meredith's DNA. But the team that would exonerate Amanda would reach the following conclusion: that there was no blood on the knife, no DNA from the victim, no evidence whatsoever to show that that knife was involved in any way. They did not deny that Amanda's DNA was on the handle of the knife, but that could have been explained because she used the knife for cooking at Raffaele's flat. The blade of the knife unveiled starch from rye bread that was consistent with the fact that it was used for cooking. And the tests on that knife will show no human DNA, including Meredith's. However, the contradicting evidence that would exonerate both Amanda and Raffaele would only be introduced to the public in 2011, at the stage of their appeals, after both of them had served almost 4 years in prison. In the next parter, we will be picking up in real time. Now that we actually have gone through all of the evidence, the crime scene, we'll be picking up from the time of the arrest, the signed statements that Amanda and Raffaele gave to the police. How did they even hone in on Rudy being on the location? What DNA evidence led to that? How was Rudy Gude arrested? And then we will speak about pre-trial, the trial, and finally the exoneration and where this case stands now, where the Kercher family is now. We're gonna go back into John's book to finalize this with the perspective of the Kercher family, which couldn't really be done much here, breaking down this evidence room by room. I really need to start figuring out how to make shorter videos because this is getting ridiculous, man.
Well, you let me know your theories underneath. I'm gonna make myself tea and start editing this beauty that will totally not be 4 hours long. I beg of you. I beg of you. Make it less than that. Actually, nobody will watch a 4 hour long video. You say you will. Just say, please say, don't break my heart like this. Please say it's important information that makes you make an educated decision. Please understand the level of unhinged that I'm going through. I will do better. I will make them shorter. I'll try, okay? I'll try. Subscribe and like, please. Insanity levels have increased somehow. This is why you make 4-parters and not 3-parters, okay? What did we learn from this? Did we learn from our mistakes? I should be seeing you soon. I hope. I hope, truly. Bye. Bye.